I should record, huh? Okay, so today is 12/3/18. So evolution is a change in species over many generations, and it's really just an underlying change in gene frequency. There's some evidence for this, wouldn't you know? Because it's a theory, and a theory is pretty serious stuff. A theory is robust, and the first strand of evidence is what? Remember this? It's been like years. Fossil record. We see similar species in the fossil record. Oh, hey, that's me. And we can see those changes over time. Second strand of evidence is what we've been talking about forever, for 4 months. Structural evidence. And we could also say it's morphological evidence. Structural or morphological evidence. And I want to wrap up just a couple of concepts. We're going to wrap this up today. You're going to do one more thing with structural evidence before we go on to the third strand, which, I could say, ooh, it's the mystery strand. No, we've talked about it. It's chemical evidence. But I want to wrap up a couple ideas with structural. So we left off talking about vestigial structures, things that aren't necessary anymore. They don't have a known use in a modern species. But they're there, and they're evidence of their evolutionary past. And I think we got interrupted. We were talking about wisdom teeth. We were talking about Dante's sister, who is way above average in the wisdom teeth department, because she had how many? 6. That's amazing. The default number is 4. Some people are born with more than that. Some people are born with less than that. So the question is, why would that number change? So what is that an example of in a population? Just variation, right? We're all a little different. She's got 6 wisdom teeth in her head. You got 3. I've had a few people who say, I only have 2. I didn't get any on top. Okay. So is that evidence of evolution? Are wisdom teeth a vestigial feature? What the heck is the purpose of wisdom teeth anyway? Where did we leave this?
Extra chomping bite.
Okay, so extra chomping, extra biting, extra grinding, yes. How many of you have chewed up raw roots that you dug up yourselves over the weekend? Really? None of you? You did? Okay, a few of you. For the most part, we don't need that kind of chewing power anymore. We're eating mac and cheese, people. We're eating processed food. We're eating sausage. Little ground up chunks of meat. We barely have to chew. No, not really. But we're eating a lot of foods that don't require that level of jaw strength, that don't require that level of grinding. But here's the question. Is there any disadvantage to having, let's say, 6 wisdom teeth?
Yes, more grinding power.
Anybody ever had an infected tooth? Ooh, I have. Have you ever had a cavity that went to infection? It's like the worst 2 months of my life waiting to get in to get a root canal. Okay, well, that's where you have an inflamed nerve. But if you've got extra teeth in your head, why did she have them removed? Why would you go through surgery? Has anybody else here had their wisdom teeth removed?
I don't know.
Why do they remove them sometimes? No? Make them not. The term we talk about is impacted wisdom teeth. So here's a little old human jaw. It's the best I can do at the moment. What happens if those teeth don't come all the way through? If they're sort of partly stuck under gum?
Well, you're going to be sore.
Well, it's going to hurt. But the other thing that's going to happen if they get impacted is very often they become infected. They hurt, they get infected. What happens if your teeth get infected now? Take an antibiotic, they surgically remove them, you have oral surgery, you get the good drugs, they cut them out of your head, you go home packed with cotton, you chill out for an afternoon and you eat Jell-O for a few days. No problem. What happened if your teeth got infected 200 years ago? You died. Tooth infections were an especially serious killer. Do you know why?
Because they're
so close to the brain.
They're close to the brain. It's geography, people. The blood supply in the mouth. Yeah, tooth infections are seriously dangerous because that's close to your brain. That infection can go to your brain. That infection can kill you pretty easily. Now, we have antibiotics and we have oral surgery. Not a problem. What happens if we no longer have those things?
We die.
Is there an evolutionary pressure at that point to have fewer wisdom teeth? Do more people survive who have fewer wisdom teeth?
Yes.
Possibly. Wisdom teeth are really vestigial. We don't need them so much anymore. They're evidence of our evolutionary past when our ancestors did grind up lots of roots and bark and tough stuff. Ate raw meat.
You can eat bark.
Some barks. Well, I mean, here's
Hungry enough.
if you're hungry enough, and if you look at what primate species around the planet eat, I mean, we are a primate species. There are lots of primate species that eat roots, ground roots. We've developed a couple things. We cook our food, which softens it. We're the only species I'm aware of that cooks food. We don't need the kind of chomping power we have. Our food's softer than that. So these are really vestigial. What else is vestigial? Somebody mentioned one other thing. Okay, so there is the ear of an unsuspecting biology teacher. You see that little point? Who here has ever watched? Who here has ever? Are you point? Oh, do you have points? No, I don't know. I can't tell from here. Has anybody ever watched a dog move their ears in response to sound?
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Can you do that?
Yeah.
You can? Really? Well, okay, wiggling is a whole different thing. I'm talking about actually moving the direction of your ears. Yeah, with your hands. You lack the muscles to do that. Dogs, rabbits, horses, goats, all those animal species that have got those nice big sort of radar dish ears are able, well, in dogs that have floppy ears, it's a little tougher because you've got a lot more mass to move with a given amount of muscle. Humans can't do it, but guess what? Some of our ancestor species could, and that little point on the ear is the remnant of an attachment site for muscles. Just because I have that little point, I can't move my ears. I still can't do that. But that's a vestigial feature. That points to some point in evolutionary history where our ancestor species were capable of moving those ears. Now, there's one other thing somebody mentioned. What is that?
That is the...
Somebody said this the other day. Appendix. So here's the thing that we very often hear. The appendix is a vestigial structure.
What is an appendix?
What is an appendix? That's a good question. So here's the whole mess of your guts. All the small intestine, the large intestine. This little wiggly end on the end of the ascending colon, I think. That's your appendix, this little tail end. It is said to be a vestigial feature because at one time, again, when our ancestors were eating a lot more sort of like raw grains, barks, raw grass, they had to have a much longer gut to digest that stuff. What do you know about cow guts? Long. Herbivore guts tend to be super, super long. Pardon? No? Okay. Herbivore guts tend to be really, really long. We're very omnivorous, and we, like I said, we cook our food. We're eating just different food than our ancestors did. And this little appendix, this tail, is a remnant of a longer gut that used to exist in some ancestor of humans. Great. Does it do you any harm? Does it do you any good? Gesundheit. Well, now, if you end up with an inflamed appendix, what do? They take it out. You have surgery. They remove it surgically, and that's, well, cut, pull, cinch, all kinds of stuff. If it ruptures, what happens is you do understand what's in the intestine, correct?
No.
Poop. It's pre-poop. If that appendix ruptures, what you now have is poop in the intestinal cavity.
My uncle blew
Well, it's deadly is what it is. Because that's what's called sepsis. Whenever you have a tear in the intestine, the entire abdominal cavity now is basically contaminated, and you have sepsis. And sepsis kills pretty quickly. Basically, all the organs shut down, and you just die. You can't survive that. Now, there are people who have survived a burst appendix, but that's really dependent on it being caught very early. Like, if you are in the hospital when it bursts, they can usually save you. If you're an hour and a half away from the hospital when it bursts, you're probably going to die. You know, if you're out in the wilderness someplace, I mean, I don't know the exact times on this, but you can't survive that for long. And prior to modern surgery, prior to the ability to put people under, prior to the ability to give people antibiotics, this was just death. This was just plain old death. And there was some movie I watched set in, like, the 1830s, and what was it? No, it was a series on BBC, and it was set in London in the 1830s, and it's this doctor, and someone comes in, and with the pain described, they say, well, they know what it is. It's the appendix. Well, what can we do? Well, nothing. You can hold his hand. He's going to die. That's it. It's not survivable. There's no coming back. The appendix is probably a vestigial feature. However, what we have found is there's a function that it's playing in modern humans.
What is it?
It's a hiding place.
A hiding place?
It's a hiding place. When you take an antibiotic that kills... Okay, we talked about this when we talked about antibiotics at the beginning of the year. Sometimes antibiotics give people diarrhea because they kill off the bacteria in the intestine. Guess where antibiotics don't generally reach? The appendix. That ends up acting as a little reservoir of bacteria that can repopulate the gut. So they have found differences for people who still have their appendix versus people who don't anymore. Differences in how they recover after having an antibiotic. So having your appendix, as long as it doesn't go bad on you, and I don't know what causes them to go bad, I have no idea, that's an advantage to you because it's this little reservoir of bacteria. So there are a couple things that we can look at in humans that we can say those are vestigial features. It's not just snake legs and whale legs. We got them too. The points on the ears and the appendix. Well, the 5-fingered hand is pretty useful for grasping things. Okay, so with that, here's the question I have for you next. How do scientists, biologists, people who are classifying species, look at species and identify these morphological, these structural differences? Like, what does it take? Is it just glancing at something? So, no, it's some sort of reptilian thing. Some sort of reptilian thing here. Badly drawn, of course. But the question is, if you come across two things that look a little bit like this, but one of them you find has more claws, for instance, and it has a shorter tail or a longer tail or different markings. How do you figure out those differences? So a lot of it comes down to very, very careful measurement of lots of individuals. What you have as an assignment right now, and this is on Classroom, it's called the Lizard Lab. Oh man. And you're going to do only Module 1 today. So you're going to actually do some measurements on lizards. Let's look at this together. So please note, you are going to be turning in 6 images for this. You can put them all in a document or you can submit them separately. They change the way that I interact with the stuff you turn in, so it's fine if you put them in a document. You'll just take the pictures. The preliminary groups with labels, when you go in, there are a couple little videos that you're going to watch. You're going to take measurements of a bunch of lizards. Very careful measurements. If you screw up your measurements, your data's screwed up. And there's a completed screen that shows checkboxes for all the species. That shows me that you completed all the species. Do not take pictures of the individual lizards. Do the overview completed screen. If you have questions about what that is, I'll help you. Your results table, once you get all your measurements in, it'll generate a table for you. It's going to graph it for you, and then it's going to ask you questions based on those graphs and tables. And then you're going to have a chance to rearrange your groups from what you saw before. So you preliminarily, and I've done this whole lab myself, you're looking at, well, these two are both green. I don't know, maybe they're closely related. Because you're trying to group these things where you think they're most closely related. So, questions, comments, concerns? You do have to click on Enter Virtual Lab. I had somebody one year who said, well, I couldn't figure it out. It's right there. There's a big button. It says Enter the Lab. And when you get to here, you're going to click on Module 1 because Module 1 is the only module that you are doing. We'll do Module 2 when we talk about chemical evidence, but you're just doing Module 1 today. Okay, question? Okay, get moving.